You are about to receive messages that may be harmful to your mental state. Your sense of reality will be questioned. Your view on things will be altered. You are now part of the meta. The meta controls everything. The meta determines what will and will not happen. You are watching the Meta Show.
And good afternoon, all of my fellow shut-ins across the world. This is the Meta Show for Saturday, March 14th, Pi Day 3.14. So for all you nerds, I know this is a national holiday for you, so I hope you're out there with your protractors and getting ready to have a fun show. I am joined as always by my co-host, the Matani.
Oh, thank you so much. I only recently learned a few years ago about Pi Day being a nerd holiday, and it was basically just an excuse to go eat really fancy cheesecake, which I guess you probably can't do or go to a restaurant or anything. But if you have pie or you have cheesecake or you're going to make a pie, it's a good excuse to basically just load up on delicious sugar. And, that's about as close as I get to mathematics in general is, eating pie on Pi Day. Otherwise, it's all just sort of Greek to me, I guess. All right, so we've got a pretty crazy show, guys. I'm really excited about it because I am going to learn a lot about shit that I have no understanding of. Basically, there was this whole mess of things that took place over the week while I was running around and setting up my little apocalypse bunker or whatever the hell. There was a huge slap fight in Wormhole space that I do not understand. We have some of the major players involved. That we have Exookzi, who I just learned you don't actually pronounce the Z, it's a silent Z. That's how much I know about what's going on. And we also have Loroseco back again. And, Brisk also has been very involved with Wormhole stuff. And so hopefully these guys are going to explain to us, the nullsec audience that typically watches the Meta Show, why these guys are so mad at each other, what the hell happened over the course of the last week involving Wormhole space, and also how some of these nerfs that have come down are impacting. Like there's something involving frigate mass whole things that the Wormhole guys are really mad about. I don't understand, but we are going to learn. And it's going to be interesting. So this is not going to be like one of these Jerry Springer shows where like our two Wormhole guests are on opposing sides. They were on opposing sides, and I think they are mad at each other. But this is more intended to be like a what the hell is happening, sort of spoon feeding us nullsec people why these guys are fighting and what happened. But even before we get to that, we have some more crazy shit that's going on, and I'm delighted that we get a chance to break out one of my favorite segments that we don't normally get to do because we rarely have news that's there. Lawyer joke time, guys. We're going to be piercing the corporate veil. And the way we're going to be piercing the corporate veil is Brisk is going to press a button, and then we're going to be talking a lot first, before we get to the Wormhole stuff, about things that are happening in China with the Serenity server. And I think that's going to be really interesting. So, Brisk, take us away.
So as Mitten said, one of the things I think is probably the biggest thing that we have seen in the last couple of months in EVE, especially for CCP, and I think also for Tranquility Server, is the fact that finally, 2 years later, the Chinese government has finally agreed to give NetEase a license to publish EVE Online in China. Now this was a huge issue, huge deal for the company and for the players of EVE Online over in China. And I think one of the things that I think we need to talk about is I think this has a lot of implications, so I want to go through it with you guys because I think it's a pretty big deal. So let's roll back time. For the longest time, I want to say since 2012 until 2016, EVE was online in China. A company called Tiancity was their publisher for the most part. Essentially, what happens in China is Western games tend to partner with a Chinese publishing company. Blizzard, for example, has long time partnered with NetEase, and CCP had partnered with Tiancity, and they published EVE Online as EVE Online in China. Serenity Server was region locked to China. You had to be in that area in order to play on it, and it was all Chinese language. And the game, up until late 2016, got all the same updates that main EVE got. But at some point at 2016, Tiancity, they decided to change over who was publishing the game. And the result of that was they never got the Apocrypha release. So there was no change there was no, the Ascension release. So there was no Alpha and Omega clones. And everything that basically happened from Citadels to today, no one in China got. And then in 2018, CCP finally inked a deal with NetEase to take over publishing of the EVE Online property over in China. That's a big deal because NetEase is a massive company. They are huge. They are one of the biggest gaming companies in the world, let alone in China. They're probably, I think they're number 2 in China, but they're the top 10, internationally. They do about $3 billion a year in business. It's a pretty big company. And as I said, they've had a contract with Blizzard for a long time, I think 8 or 9 years now. And they publish all of Blizzard's stuff over there. They've done Overwatch, they've done World of Warcraft, they've done regular Warcraft, StarCraft, all those types of games over in China, and that's been a big deal. NetEase is also CCP's partner on Eve Echoes, the mobile game that's going to be coming out. So here's what's essentially what we're finally seeing, because the Chinese government gave the okay. Since the Serenity server was shut down in 2018, we have seen a large number of players coming over from Serenity to Tranquility to play over here because they don't have another chance to play Eve. So we saw, for example, Army of Mangoes is the Tranquility version of the Pan-Galactic Business Corporation, which was like the big group over in Serenity, and they've been on our server, I want to say, for 6 or probably more than 6 months now. They've already announced that when Serenity comes back online, they're going to go back. Now, some of the other Chinese groups like Fraternity, they are going to stick around, at least according to Fulcrum and some of the folks we've talked to. Those groups are going to be here. They're not going anywhere. But groups like the old PIBC groups are probably going to go back to Serenity. Now, we don't know. Now, Mittens and I have talked about this. I tried to get CCP to confirm this before the show, but we weren't able to get an answer. We're not 100% sure whether they're going to wipe the Serenity server and start from scratch, or where everybody's going to pick up where they left off in 2018. Regardless, the game is going to be completely different from those new players coming in than it has been even for the folks that were there before. Because all of the stuff that they could do in 2018, think about it. No trig shifts, no nerfs to Titans, no Haw nerfs, none of the changes to moon mining. They still have passive income on Serenity when they shut it down. All that type of stuff never got fixed, so all of that's going to be brand new to these players. I think this is going to be a big deal. I think if they do the marketing right, there's a huge potential synergy between Eve Echoes and the online game, the desktop game. I think CCP is going to make a lot of money and get a lot of new subscribers. And I think, frankly, China, as much as the rest of us, they need as much diversion and entertainment during the pandemic as the rest of us do. And this is something that you can do at home. So I feel like this is probably the best time that they possibly could have finally got the license set for this game. And I wouldn't be surprised if that was part of the reason why the Chinese government finally got off their butts and let them do that, because this had been languishing for about a year and a half. What do you think, Mittens?
It's interesting because it's news to me. I've been obviously busy with a whole bunch of different things, and I did not know until you just announced it here that there was an Army of Mangoes announcement that they were going to be going back. So that is news to me. That is going to make an impact on the politics of Tranquility, if that's true. One of the things that I think is, I don't know how many people are actually going to go back to it, because one of the reasons why we started seeing refugees essentially from the losing side of the Chinese equivalent of the Great War coming to Tranquility starting several years ago was the fact that there was a particular change in the way that area effect Titan weapons worked, where they would not actually drain one another if you were doing like mass bosoning or whatever. I forget whether it was the boson or one of the others, but basically what that allowed. And a lot of people credit to Rooks and Kings and an amazing video that they produced sort of explaining the differences between Serenity and Tranquility. This allowed a small network of Titans to basically bounce around the galaxy and just annihilate subcap fleets, sort of like the battle days of remote doomsdays and even area effect doomsdays. during the Great War on Tranquility. So so this is actually, if that oppression, if that particular difference in game balance between Tranquility and Serenity has not been adjusted, I think that, you know, the people that were the galactic rulers over on Serenity have an incentive to go back to running a galaxy that they have essentially total power over. Like, you know, if the Imperium could bounce around and just vaporize subcap fleets without having to worry about the capacitor of our Titans getting nuked for doing it, it would be madness, right? Like we know what that happens because we've seen that kind of behavior during the Great War with the AOE doomsdays, with the remote doomsdays, battle days. We're talking like 2007, 2008 era Eve. So it's a real question, right? There's an incentive for the people that were running the galaxy on Serenity back in 2018 to go back there and, you know, sort of retake their throne and, you know, run that galaxy. But the real question is, it always, and this is like a super nerdy reference, but I am in that age group where I grew up reading like Dragonlance novels when I was in like the 7th and the 8th grade, like the Weiss Hickman, like Raistlin and Caramon and all that shit. And one of the things that always sort of struck me, and this was the question that people would ask me periodically, I get asked, you know, why don't goons try to conquer the entire galaxy? Why don't you try to take everything over, you know, whatever? And in the second Dragonlance trilogy, again, deep bench nerd shit here, guys. In the second Dragonlance trilogy, Raistlin becomes a fucking god, and they're like going back in time to like the time of troubles where there's like an asteroid getting dropped on Kryn. I can't believe I remember this stuff with this level of specificity. I have not read these books since fucking
I'm
high
impressed
school.
because I can't remember any of that stuff from back then.
But
that's good.
Basically, there's a scene where Raistlin has become a god and he has conquered everything, and he's miserable because in this particular timeline, he is ruling over a dead world. And believe me, as somebody who enjoys the whole Emperor and the Space Tyrant thing, it's not much fun unless you can actually rule and have an empire. And so that, I think, is going to be one of the challenges that these guys have, is if there are not enough people to have the empire to fight against, essentially ruling over a dead world, ruling over a dead galaxy is not that much fun. So if Army of Mangoes goes back and wants to become sort of the top dog of Serenity, the real question is going to be, do enough other players come back? Now, enough players may come back because, like you said, or new players joining the game in the first place because NetEase is running Eve Echoes, and that will likely be a funnel of new players going into the Serenity game, where Army of Mangoes, I assume, is going to try to take up ownership and leadership. So we don't know. I think it's going to be really interesting to watch. I think that the Chinese alliances that are more invested in what's happening on Tranquility, and the fact that there is like an active series of wars, and people, you know, when people are mad, when people are angry about things in a video game, they stick to it. Like EVE Online during the Great War was a horrifically unbalanced game. In the year of our Lord 2020, as much as we complain about this or that, like the game is so much better balanced than in 2006 to 2009. And also 2006 to 2009, there was the T20 scandal. Like we found out the devs were cheating against us. There were so many reasons to not play EVE during the Great War, but we played the hell out of the game because we were really, really tremendously ass blasted. Right, like we were so mad, we were so angry collectively as a player base that we didn't really care about the lack of balance of the game. We just wanted to kill the other guy. And I think that what we're seeing, and what I hope happens, because I don't want us to lose our Chinese community that has established itself within Tranquility, but my hope is that the people that have played on Tranquility enough to have rivalries and to get ass blasted, as it were, at each other, that will hold them into Tranquility. But we'll have to see. I think it's going to be really interesting to see. It is fascinating because it's very rare that you have an MMO that was going along, shut down for such a long period of time, and then turn on again. And what does that mean? We don't know, but we're going to see. I think it's going to be really interesting in the coming months.
I agree, and I think even taking a step back and looking at this from a business perspective, I think having come off of a pretty successful Korean relaunch to doing a Chinese relaunch with its own server over there, I think now is probably the best time they could have possibly done it, like I said before. And I'm looking forward to seeing what the impact is of this change on the income, at least for hopefully whenever we get a release date. Apparently, they are doing an open beta before they do a full launch, so we will see the timeline, and we haven't got any dates yet. But I would assume, and I would like to hope that probably this is in by second quarter. So if they have a solid second quarter, I think that would be great for the game, and I think it would be great for us. All the money that they bring in, the more money they bring in, the more they can put into developing the game. So that means we can hire more people and do more stuff, and they don't have to worry about any of that kind of thing. And they can hit their numbers with Pearl Abyss and make everybody happy. And when developers are happy and investors are happy, then we tend to be happy because good stuff happens. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. I think it's going to be great. Pivoting off of China for a minute and pulling it back to the game briefly before we get to our guests and our top story, I just want to go over some stuff to make sure you guys are aware of things that have been happening in the game in terms of CCP stuff in the last week. First, market changes went live. If you haven't seen those, you probably have seen those already. I would just double check and keep an eye out for that. We're still trying to figure out what the impact is going to be on those changes, but so far it hasn't seemed that dramatic. So I think that's probably a good thing. Second thing is, Skilling Spree is now active again. Skilling is a means of communication. If you got as a play on the Killing is a Means of Communication song from Permaband. And if you haven't seen that, this is the first time that there's been an in-game kind of live event that I can recall that was focused solely on PvP. In order to get those skill points, in the past you'd had to go out and kill a rat, and it was random how many rats you had to kill. Now you have to go out and get top damage on a Capsuleer. Not just the final blow, you got to get top damage. And I think that I was out PvPing, and we killed about 30 or 40 people today, and I think I finally got it after I got one time where I got top damage, so I finally got my Skilling Spree done. So that's available, and that's extra skill points. Take advantage of that. And then finally, I'm going to log in bonus weekend this weekend. If you haven't logged all your tunes in, do it now. And yes, I said tunes because I'm a boomer, apparently. And if you haven't, make sure you hit that and get those free skill points, because whether you use them or not, they're nice to have in the bank, and don't ever not take something that's given to you for free. So that's the end of that. I think with that, Mins, if you're ready, I think we can transition. Let's go in here and get to our top story.
Yeah, we can ask them about our mommies, our toonies, and our desies.
Exactly.
I'm excited.
And welcome, Exookzi from Scary Wormhole People, also the Dark Space Initiative, and Loroseco Cross from Hard Knocks. These are our two guests today. It's great to have you guys on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having us. Both happy to be here.
Great to be here.
So,
if you guys could introduce yourselves, just to begin with, assuming that you are talking to an audience of people from nullsec that are like me. Brisk knows lots about wormhole stuff, and I keep repeating this because it's true. I am flying blind here. We've had Loroseco as a guest on the show before, but just assuming from nothing, let's start with Exookzi. I always fuck up the pronouncing this name. Exo, if you could introduce yourself and explain who you are in Wormhole Land and what organization you represent, and then we'll do the same for Loroseco, and so we know who the hell you guys are. How about that?
Sure. So I'm Exookzi. I generally just go by Exo, although I'm quite used to, over the years, people pronouncing my name a lot of different ways. I've been playing EVE for about 11 years. Almost entirely of it was actually in Wormhole space. I'll have been with my corp for 11 years in June. So the Dark Space Initiative is really the corp. It's the only relevant corporation in Scary Wormhole People. All the other corps that we have had and still have are really just people's alts kind of stuff. But so I'm a wormholer pretty much through and through. That's all I've got going for me, so to speak. I've been all over EVE,
which is
as your EVE adventures take you. But I've never been, I haven't sat through or been a part of any large null groups. I've never done faction warfare. I did do high sec missions, as back in 2000 in 2009. That was where you started though. So I started in high sec missions, and eventually I joined a corp, and we were wormhole diving. We didn't live in them, and then next thing you know, we did live in them, and then from there we haven't really left. I'm also I'm currently the wormhole CSM candidate. So I'm on. I'm not just supported by Wormhole Space, but I'm on the CSM as well. I was at the summit last week and been doing my best to help make Eve a better place.
Excellent. Loroseco, who the hell are you and why should we care?
Hi, I'm Loroseco. I've been in Hard Knocks for about 5 years now, and one of Hard Knocks' head of ops for a little over 1 year of that time. I'm what I'd call an Asakai baby. I started just after the Battle of Asakai because of all the news coverage. Ended up
There you go.
Ended up in Brave Newbies, which I think most people who started around then ended up in Brave Newbies. I was there for a couple of months before I got poached by Suaz, Black Omega Security, into Goon Swarm. I had a blast there. I was in the Halloween War. Was on field for BTACR. I think I was in a Crow. Horde on a few Titans. Went for dinner. Came back. Still at full shields. After that, I got the Wormhole bug. I joined Hard Knocks about late 2014, and I've been there ever since, plus or minus a few months here and there in different case-based groups. I was in Skill Yourself for the whole drone war, kicking the RF out, which was a very interesting experience. Basically, my only experience of soft warfare post-Dominion. And then rejoined in late 2018 into Hard Knocks just in time to get our ass kicked by INT the first time. Got given leadership position shortly after, and I've been here ever since.
So that's excellent. And I think the fact that you guys are both here, and I appreciate you both coming on, and I know that because of the recent unpleasantness, for those that don't know, I'm going to run through this very quickly. You guys can correct any of my facts if I get them wrong, but I don't want to belabor this because I feel like every other show has talked about this. And so if you are not aware of what has happened in Wormhole Space in the last week or so, then you are under a rock and you're probably not watching the show anyway. And I tend to think that our viewers are some of the more savvy and well-informed viewers of EVE Online Media, so they understand what's going on. So anyway, HK, along with Inner Hell and Hull Control and Laserhawks, evicted TD Sin, which is one of the main corps in Scary Wormhole People, from their home wormhole, which was nicknamed Solaris, and that happened. I guess it was last Sunday was the final hull timer. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yep.
And that was the end, and that was essentially it. Now we haven't gotten a full idea of how much loot was dropped. I've heard 2 trillion was the claim. Do you guys have any idea what the number?
Yeah,
number was?
I can confirm that now because I'm staring at the list of loot right now. It was me.
All right,
so
perfect. So 2 trillion worth of ISK was
No,
looted from that
was not.
eviction.
I'll correct you quickly there. We pulled 1.2 trillion ISK from Solaris, but that also included everything we took in with us. I made a mistake.
Okay,
I mixed
all right,
everything up.
got it,
I'd
got
say
it.
conservatively 500 to 600 billion was looted from
Which is still
TDs.
good. I mean, that's still a pretty good. Pretty solid haul.
What's Solaris? I mean, other than Solaris 7 from BattleTech.
Yeah, how did you pick that name, Exookzi?
What is it?
Geez. I actually couldn't even tell you. So, it's common for wormhole corporations to give a name to their home system, because like in Wormhole Space, our system names are J and then a bunch of numbers. That's like hard to remember. It's not very sexy at all. And so only the lame corps call home actually just home. So when you're saying, hey, there's a fleet in X, very, very few corps are ever referring to wormholes by their J code. So like whatever our static is called static. Like no one actually cares what the J code is. When we moved in about 5 years ago, we had a poll. People suggested, sci-fi sounding names, so what we were going to call it. And Solaris is what won, is my recollection. One of my court members in chat's telling me it's actually just the person that found it got the name, which could also be true. I actually don't remember. But if in whatever case, our home system was called Solaris, and that's where we've lived for the last 5 years.
Okay, so essentially, TD Sin had been in there for 5 years and had accumulated enough stuff for 5 years, and the battles inside that wormhole were some of the biggest. I would say, would you guys agree with me that was probably the biggest fights in Wormhole Space?
Yeah,
in terms
I
of
think
raw numbers.
Well, in terms of raw numbers, I think the first battle in Rage outclassed that, but the fighting in
Okay.
Rage wasn't very severe back in 2018. It was definitely the bloodiest fight in Wormhole space by quite a long way. I think it was double the scale of second place, which would have been the eviction of Pos Party in mid 2018.
Yep, I was gonna say that's probably the contender for bloodiest. Although, thinking back, I don't think we have to dig too far back before we're eventually just gonna find our way back to the last time we got evicted in 2016, which also was a like 400-500 billion-esque campaign.
And who did that to you guys last time?
Oh, them again. It was them too.
Okay.
Yeah, that was
All right.
I was AFK at the time. I'm waiving responsibility for that one.
So essentially, at least in the last week, we've seen some major fighting in these wormholes, in Solaris in particular, and then additionally, when Solaris was under attack, Initiative and other groups were able to sneak into HK's home wormhole of Rage and evict them, and that was basically a reprise of what had happened last year. Although it was on a much smaller scale, there weren't any keep stars in there anymore, just a couple of faction fortizars and a lot of other structures. So the amount of ISK that was brought out of there was nothing compared to what happened with Solaris or what happened last time in Rage. It was really kind of just a mopping up at the end of the thing. But essentially, between the Solaris and the Rage fights, there was more than 1 trillion ISK lost on both sides in wormhole space in the last week or so, and that's been kind of crazy. And I think that, if anything, has put wormholes front of mind for a lot of people who otherwise wouldn't be talking about it. Many of them, I think, got their first taste of wormhole fighting in this fight, whether it was on behalf of Tidson or whether on behalf of HK and Laserhawks and those guys, because this was one of the first times I can remember where a lot of nullsec groups got called into it. But I want to take it back a step, and Mittens and I can go back and forth on this, because I think we've got just some basic questions, because I want to talk to the audience through this. We've been talking about evictions. Essentially, can you guys talk us through, or what is an eviction? How common are they? Have there been evictions of this size recently? Is this like the biggest thing in a while? I mean, how often does this type of thing, how exactly do you go about it and those types of things? Because I think for a lot of us, we're not used to the whole concept. Maybe your sob gets taken, but the idea that somebody can come in and just burn everything down and then leave, that's generally a rare thing in nullsec. It happens, but it's not like an everyday kind of occurrence. So can you guys talk us through that?
I think the best way to describe evictions to people who live in nullsec is to describe them as a package deal nullsec sov war. So sov wars, you don't just do them because you hate the other person. You do them because they're fun as hell to fight. You do them because, as I said on Talking in Stations, they're the perfect storm of high stakes, intense planning, impactful decision making, and butterfly effect, every pilot matters moments, all of these moments that we all love about Eve. And nullsec takes that Wormhole Evictions takes that entire experience and compacts it into 3 or 4 days of raw 24-hour fighting, or at least 24-hour playing Eve online. So instead of planning a campaign over many months, all of the fighting is focused around one system, and the fighting lasts as long as the timers for the structures in that system last. So instead of having these many months, I've never fought a nullsec campaign as leadership, but I assume it's many months of stress and planning and meetings and such, and working out what to do. You just take 1 or 2 days off work, bang it out in a weekend, and you've had a really fun, compact Eve experience in that time.
That seems reasonable. And to clarify for chat, you were on the field in BR5 and stuff like that, but it sounds like that you haven't really dealt too much with like actual like modern Fozzie-Sob. Like it sounds like you went into wormhole space after Dominion or like during. Is that accurate?
I was in the drone regions for the war between Skilly and DRF, but I was not in a leadership position. So my experience is as a line member.
I'll let you in on a secret, Loro. Most nullsec people don't describe soft warfare as tons of fun right now.
We despise it. We do it because of the hate and because of economic advantage. Like we do it because we have to. This is going to be interesting, I think, because this is an opportunity for like the wormhole people and the nullsec people to like sort of disabuse each other of our illusions. But basically, one of the reasons why the galaxy has changed the way it has is after they implemented Fozzie-Sov during whenever the hell that shit went in. It became such a chore that we try to find any other means possible to engage in warfare. And then once one side has basically admitted defeat, then sort of the cleanup crew comes in, and we just try to get rid of the Fozzie stuff as fast as we can. And so that's what it is. But I agree with the idea that it's a high stakes thing that's very compressed into a 24-hour thing. And it sounds like you guys don't have to deal with Fozzie, which is really nice.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, there's everything in Evictions purely just about shooting stuff. There's no Sov wanding going on here.
How common are they? I mean, is this something that every wormhole group is going to deal with at some point, or is this something that only the big guys
absolutely
have to deal with?
Yeah, evictions are extremely common. Evictions of this scale that are this bloody, I would say, are pretty rare. I think, just like we touched on when we were talking about the kind of biggest wormhole battles, the last battle I can think of that was this big and this bloody was probably the eviction of Pospey in 2019? Yeah, it would have been
2018, I think. It was just before your fan press presentation, I remember.
Yeah, but you're right. Yep. And like corps are getting evicted from wormhole space all the time. Most of them probably have little to no fighting. It's somebody rolling over structures of the other, and that's it. And then there's a bunch of looting, and the attackers go home, and the defenders cry and put up new structures, move somewhere. Sometimes there's a fight. It all boils down to kind of how big the attacking force is, and I think how strong the defenders are. Something that's extremely common in wormhole space, in part to the asset safety mechanics, abandoned low power stuff does not sit around for very long. Like you don't go through wormhole space and be like, man, look at all these low power Astras that nobody cares about. Those things get mopped up quick. That's, I would say, the number one reason corps are going into another wormhole and blowing up all the structures is purely because they think it'll be easy and a pile of loot. I think is probably the number one reason when we're just looking at all evictions, not necessarily good ones, just all of them. Then you've got lots of other reasons that corps go out and going and sieging each other. Sometimes people do it just to provoke a fight. It's again due to our asset safety mechanics. I can go in a system, start shooting all their structures, and say, if you do not come and stop me, you are going to lose all your stuff. And there's corps that have done that go out, provoke the fight. It also means that if you try to evict someone and you lose, then you can go, oh, it was a content eviction, we weren't actually trying. Cover your tracks very cleverly. I'm sure everybody's done that at least once or twice.
It's always good to have a spin to fall back on if things don't work out the way you expect.
Absolutely. But and then ones of this scale, I would say, are pretty rare. There's been a couple other large-ish ones we've seen over the last couple of months, but none that kind of reached this high. I mean, Mouth Trumpet has got evicted a couple months ago. Before that, excuse me, Beyond the Breach was evicted. There's been medium-sized evictions. Or you could if you could call those large, as long as you want to just acknowledge that I think Solaris is also on its own entire level. What do you think, Laura?
I think 100v100 is classed as large in wormhole space, which is about where Beyond the Breach got to, which was a Fortizar and a C2. And they ended up ungulking a ridiculous amount of caps, something like 30 or 40 carriers, which is a lot for wormhole space. In a C2, they would have built them all in there and handed them out to members for the defense. I think the final fight for Solaris was something like 350 to 450 on our side versus 450 to 550 on your side. Sort of about as even as you're going to get.
If you
include
online. Some of the fleets that were there, but of questionable impact, I think we were up to over 600. But we had some fleets come join the fight from Nullsec that didn't stay on the field for very long, so their impact is questionable.
As the fort gunner for that fight, I'm taking full credit for that.
What the guys are talking about is if you've ever flown with Asher and Goons, there's always about a 50% chance that he will warp you into a PDS and you will all die. And apparently that happened in Solaris on Sunday night. So, gotta love it.
in his defense, my working theory is that he didn't realize he was warping on top of a hostile fort, because
No,
he
that's
was.
exactly it. Coordination got super shitty once like stuff was kicking off, and we had multiple FCs being like, "I'm going here, I'm going over there, I'm gonna go take care of that group," because what another thing that's just from my experience is very uncommon in wormhole space is this wasn't just two blobs smashing into each other. Each side had entire different wings competing to do their own objectives all along the grid. There were people whose job was stop this fort from repairing regardless of what's going on over there. We had a dread squad whose only job was to chase after Hard Knox's carrier crew and keep mulching them. Then we had carriers whose job it was to chase after the Tempest fleet issues.
Yeah, so
I
that
mean,
sounds like that what we would call a null-sec fleet fight is what you just described.
yeah, it's but that doesn't you don't
If you
see
guys
that
think,
often.
yeah,
You
like
don't see
actually,
that
this is
often
the
in
thing.
Wormholes.
Like, just in terms of, I'm going to try to offer from my side of the aisle in null-sec, like never go into wormhole space except for a couple times, whole squad on that real shit. But basically, like, in nullsec battles, there are lots of like little fleets and wings. Like, we don't just have fleets that we smash into each other. There are usually like multiple fleets going for multiple objectives simultaneously across a battle space, which can be like a constellation or more. So like, I don't know if there's like a stereotype of like F1 monkeys who are just like mashing ships into each other, but what you just described, which is a really cool and fun thing, is one of the reasons why we like nullsec fleet fights, because you have support fleets going around and doing stuff and having multiple objectives simultaneously in this very complex battle space. So that's cool. That sounds like a great fight.
That's a lot rarer in Wormhole simply because of the scale. The average battle in Wormholes is what, 50v50? You're kind of wasting your time with multiple wings. You'll have an FC over command of 4 people.
That makes sense.
It's fairly uncommon.
Yeah. I mean, I think from, at least from our perspective, that's one of the things that is interesting to me about wormhole space, is that we're used to massive fights, where like a big fight is 3,000 to 4,000 people, and for you guys a big fight is 100 people, but you still got the content. And I think my big question, at least in terms of evictions, because I see that as one form of conflict driver in wormhole space. What else do you guys think are the primary conflict driver? We talk about conflict drivers all the time in nullsec, and we're particularly convinced now that there are too few of them, and that's one of the reasons why there's this feeling of malaise in nullsec. And it seems like because of this eviction, regardless of whatever the reasons were, and I don't care about getting into that, but the fact that you guys did it, that was solid content for a lot of players, not just in wormholes but in nullsec for about a week or so. That's great. But what else? What other conflict drivers do you guys have? Is it all about ISK? Is it personal things? Is it just control of the best areas to rat and mine in? What drives you guys to fight each other?
I think for the most part, the only other I would say major conflict driver in wormhole space is purely I want to shoot things and they want to shoot things too. Um, Wormhole space does not have a lot of fighting over the space. There is some. I don't want to I don't want to say that no corp has ever fought another corp purely because they wanted that specific system that they were fighting over. But there's way more wormholes systems than there are corps that actually need and want to be holding them. So if I'm a corp that just wants a place to stay, um, then I don't need to do an entire campaign to go take a space for it. There's a lot of systems that are either not defended at all or very poorly defended. I could take it from. Most of your wormhole conflict is literally, I'm scanning, I find their corp, they have dudes, I have dudes, we put fleets together and smash them into each other. And I'd say that's the majority of the fights that happen. There's tons of ganking too, right? Like there's people ratting all the time in wormholes. We're hunting for them. We're catching dreads, ratting nesters, ratting rattlesnakes, all the same kind of similar things that people do when they're out roaming, out in nullsec too. But that's your quick little dunk something and I'm out. Because unlike nullsec, catching ratters rarely escalates. When it does, I'd say is actually super super cool when it escalates into people. But a lot of wormholers are farming by themselves in isolated pockets. So if they get caught, they're just dead. It doesn't usually lead to defenders showing up and back and forthing, which I know is also generally one of the more exciting parts of nullsec, is when I tackled that Rorqual. Next thing you know, I'm fighting the fleet that showed up to save it, not even the Rorqual.
And that's most of the time why we tackle the Rorks in the first place. We care less about killing whales as we do about the defense fleet, which is more fun. I died this morning to a defense fleet. I can't remember Pando. I don't even remember who we were fighting, but yeah, I was
That's
bad
fantastic.
and got off anchor and died. So.
Yeah, so I want to dive into sort of the biggest mystery for me, because like I sort of ran off to go do sort of prepare for things and whatever, and then this whole shit show actually kicked off pretty much right after the METASHOW episode last Saturday. Like Pando was doing this weird flanking maneuver and whatever, and then when the dust had sort of settled, I was sort of looking around and going, okay, guys, why is everybody so mad in wormhole space? Like, you know, if you looked at the Eve subreddit, it's just plastered with wormhole memes, which are incomprehensible to my simple mitten mind. Like I do not understand why they're very angry, but they are very, very angry, and I can tell that something happened, but it's whatever. It's like snake jazz. But like basically what I'd like to understand is if one of you or both of you could maybe explain there's something involving frigate hulls that involves CCP, and some people are mad, and some people appear to be blaming Exookzi or not blaming him, and it's about something else. But I can just tell that there is a tremendous amount of butt blast, and I appreciate a good butt blast because I love to get mad about internet spaceship games. It's one of my favorite hobbies. So no disrespect for getting mad about internet spaceship video games, but if somebody could please explain to me in very, very small, mitten, simple words, what the fuck?
Shall I take this one, since
All yours, Loro.
allegedly most of the mad came from me. I had a very went on talking in stations with little to no sleep, and it went very badly for me. So I'll try and do some corrections there. So it would help if I started explaining why wormhole rolling is important for evictions. Essentially, when you roll up into someone's home system, generally the defending force is going to be bigger than the attacking force, simply because defenders can call on a lot of friends, because evictions are mean and they tend to attract a lot of good Samaritans willing to come and help you fight off the big bad. What attackers will do, they'll roll up with a sizable force bigger than the defender's own individual corp, and then they'll lock down the system by rolling off all of the wormhole connections. What that does essentially is it's been referred to as a drawbridge mechanic. It essentially cuts off the system from the rest of Eve and gives the attackers the fight that they want to dictate against the defenders. And often, firstly, because the defenders have a lot of capitals in their home, usually. And secondly, because there are mechanics where defenders can force allies to get into the wormhole. It can sometimes be balanced, but for the most part, it is attackers locking down a system with the advantage, with the prior notice, because of course defenders don't know that they're about to be evicted. And it is somewhat skewed towards attack. Well, it is quite a bit skewed towards attackers, I'll concede that. And now we get to frigate wormholes. Frigate wormholes are, simply put, wormholes that only frigates and destroyers can travel through. That you used to be able to roll them off like any other wormhole using a loophole in mechanics that I won't go into the details to, but essentially that loophole has been closed, and frigate wormholes can no longer be rolled, which means that if you're an attacking group and you're evicting somebody and a frigate wormhole spawns, there is now a 16-hour duration connection to another system that the attackers can do nothing at all about, and the defenders can stream in as much support as they want, which admittedly it can only be in frigates and destroyers, but once those defense allies get in the system, the defenders can then hand out as many ships as they want, which in TD-Syn's case, they had hundreds upon hundreds of Tempests to hand out.
So it's a gate basically that only, it's like a 16-hour Stargate that only frigs and destroyers can get through. But yeah, I'm assuming all of that, and I'm sure that means like T2 destroyers as well, and yeah, all the flavors of frigate.
The game uses a mass limit. Any ship that is less than 5 million kilograms can fit. So that's your frigates, your destroyers. It's actually also including heavy interdictors if they're using a zero mass entangler, which is a module CCP gave us that let you shrink the size of a heavy interdictor so that they can also fit. And so, you know, it's right now, especially with the power of Kikis and stealth bombers, you can project a good amount of power through them.
And when did this, like, again, I know nothing about this. When did this, hey guys, congratulations, you have a fucking Stargate. When did you guys get Stargate with a time limit on it added to the game? Like how recently, like, is this coming or is this already in? When did this happen?
It was added years ago, but we used to be able to roll them off and to close them off early.
Right, but now you can't.
We lost the ability to remove them. It wasn't even a month ago. It was very recently. Sort of,
Okay.
we were in the final planning stages of moving into TD Sin's home when this sort of change came out, and there was a huge argument about whether we should go ahead with it or not. And
what could you guys walk through a little bit of what you guys were concerned about with that? Was there an idea that this was going to make it impossible to essentially throw the portcullis up, or is it, okay? So that was the big argument, was we wouldn't be able to stop people coming in.
So to put it simply, Hard Knocks never went into this expecting to make money. We got 500 billion out of the loot, which was more than we expected, honestly. We invested a ridiculous amount into it, something like 700 to 800 billion as a corp. Those 200 Tempest Fleet issues you saw on field, they weren't personal Tempest Fleet issues. Corp built them all in the Wormhole, fitted them with all of those faction Dead Space mods, and handed them out to anybody who came to help us. It was a huge amount of investment. And TD Sin, as you know, have been in that Wormhole for 5 years. They've had 5 years to build up a substantial carrier fleet in the triple figures, far more carriers than we have battleships. And what's more, we knew that they were allied with the Initiative, if nothing else from, firstly, TD Sin have a couple of dual citizens with Initiative, people who were in both corps at the same time. And secondly, Exookzi being on the Initiative's CSM ballots, like we had a feeling the Initiative would be involved. So we were nervous that if a frigate hull spawned, we would get overwhelmed by 1,000-man nullsec alliance, or they usually put 200 to 300 on field, which is more than our entire sort of Wormhole CFC coalition put together. We field about 200 to 300, I think, at full strength.
Now, to be clear, the connections are random. We have no idea when they're going to pop, when you're going to get a frigate hull, when you're going to, I mean, your statics can change size. Is that right?
Yeah, the frigate hulls are not static. That's correct.
Okay, so those are not static hulls. Okay, all right.
No, they're not. Completely random. The reason we went ahead with it, regardless, is because we thought we could still roll them. We had a technique that we'd not tested. It was basically throwing 200 Higgs rigs Talwars through and back the Wormhole repeatedly over the course of 20 or 30 minutes. And we thought we understood frigate hull mechanics, and we thought that would be enough to collapse it. But frigate hulls regenerate mass depending on how many people you put through them. We didn't know this beforehand. So when the Delve frigate hull spawned in Rage, which is how the Initiative and Goonswarm got in with their beachhead, we noticed that 6 hours before the Initiative and Goonswarm fleets came in, and we attempted to roll it throughout the course of those 6 hours, and it wasn't successful because we'd misunderstood the mechanics.
Do any of the other wormholes regenerate mass like that?
I think there is. I think low sec to C6s do XO, but I'm not sure about that. But it essentially no, none of them do. Okay,
because that seems like a pretty crazy change.
It is
for you guys to have to anticipate right before a major eviction. That's just nuts.
It is. I was very unhappy at the time. I was very unhappy when I was on Talking in Stations, essentially because it looked like we were going to lose our home just for the sake of just evicting TD Sin, which didn't look very good at the time. As it happens, thankfully, the final fight on the TD Sin timers was such a fantastic, perfect storm of what makes EVE Online amazing that the MAD basically evaporated in the space of about 2 hours. We had an absolute blast. I think Exookzi had a blast as well. I've heard a lot of good things from TD Sin about how much they enjoyed that fight. And I think it just goes to show that we far from wasted our time making this eviction happen. It was great content for nearly 1,000 people.
So I got two questions real quick just to go over some of the stuff because I'm still interested in it. The first thing,
sure.
Exookzi, are you guys going to go back to Solaris? I know that HK has been back to Rage. We've evicted them. They've come back. Are you guys going to stick with Solaris, or are you going to go somewhere else and build a new home?
We're gonna move. It smells really bad there now. Hard Knocks self-destructed a lot of stuff, and it's a ruined place. So I think
bad memories.
We're gonna be moving somewhere. Exactly where is a surprise. But TD Sin's decided to go try something new, so we'll be going to somewhere besides Solaris.
And my second question is more in general, and I know that I was not surprised, but I think a lot of people who had not been in wormhole space before were surprised when we evicted HK from Rage the second time about how little loot there was. And I think there was always this belief that, well, you hit a big wormhole group, it's going to be a loot pinata. You're going to make a ton because there's no asset safety, so everything's going to drop, and not a ton of stuff dropped. And I know that, at least in terms of TD Sin, because they were there for 5 years and had not been evicted in that time, that they had a lot of stuff. And you always have players that go AFK and things like that that don't realize the stuff's going on. But if you know there's an eviction, you know that the potential for evictions are there. What can you, and you don't have asset safety because it's a wormhole. What do you guys do? What can you do to mitigate the potential to lose everything? I mean, how do you is it haulers? I mean, what types of things
essentially
have you guys used?
It's haulers, but not just sort of tech one haulers. It's freighters and carriers. If you safe log a ship, then all of the assets in the ship are safe in wormhole space, just like they are in nullsec. So you fill a freighter with as much stuff as you can carry and safe log it. And even for someone like me, I have 4 PvP pilots, and all of those PvP pilots own one of each doctrine ship. So I can quad box whatever I want. I could repackage everything that I own and fit it all into one freighter. It's just an army of haulers essentially and carriers.
So do you guys set it up so that, like, say, for every account that you have, you've got your one main tune that does things, and then 2 alts that are basically skilled into haulers that can just go and safe log for months at a time without worrying about it? Is that tends to be what you guys do?
It's not that organized. Essentially, in about August, when we moved back into Rage, I made a forum post that was essentially buy freighters in full caps, and I spammed this everywhere I could for about a month after that. And it turns out people listened to me, and they bought freighters. And we did lose a lot of our PvP strength because people were logged off in their freighters. I think it is worth noting why we didn't fight in Rage, because it's sort of related to this. When the Initiative and Goonswarm came in, we were like TD Sin, we were faced with a battle on 2 fronts. We were faced with a battle in Rage and a battle in Solaris. And there's 3 choices there. You either try and split your forces half and half, or you choose one of the 2 to commit to. And we didn't want to split our forces half and half simply because we are severely outnumbered. There's no way that can go well. And out of the 2, Solaris was the more likely victory. So we potted out every PvP pilot we had from Rage and put them all into TD Sin Home before the Initiative and Goonswarm had even fully taken whole control. So the only pilots left in Rage were Dreadnought carrier and freighter pilots that were there to log off in assets. And yes, we could have fielded a substantial capital fleet, but if we were to put a carrier on field and then the carrier dies and then loses his pod, we're not just losing that cap, we're losing the 50 to 100 bill freighter jam-packed with personal assets that pilot would have logged off in. And that's why we didn't fight in Rage. Me and the other FCs, we were not prepared to risk our members' assets just to save some structures. We weren't prepared to do that.
I understand. Now, one of the questions that I had, and I thought this was interesting because one of the things that we've seen, one of the new nullsec aspects of the new nullsec meta, especially with the creation of alpha clones and those types of things, is most of the big nullsec groups now require their pilots all to have at least one alpha account that is strictly for home defense, that's trained up to fly Feroxes or something, something smaller that they can use just to defend Sov in the event of Sov trolling when they're deployed, when they're out, fighting somewhere else and they're not back home. Do you guys do anything like that? Did you have any characters that were like specifically for home defense? Is that a wormhole thing yet? Have you guys started doing that? And that's open to either of you.
We didn't, simply because I could not imagine the prospect of bothering my members to update their skill queues every day. It's not part of it, because I know it would have been my job if we went ahead with something like that, and I didn't fancy it. But I know TD Sin have done something similar to that.
So in TD Sin we have a program set up that way. We didn't require all of our members to. We suggested it. So we had a lot of people who had alts ready to go in a Tempest, and which they were of use. I mean, they didn't win us the fight or turn the tide, but I think they were helpful. We had people who, just because of timing, their mains were stuck out for some of the fights, but they were able to be there on an alpha tune. We had people that once they got potted on their omegas, they were just hot swapping and getting another Tempest right into the fight. Since a lot of the fights had, Macarials and Tempest shooting Tempest and Tempest fleet issues, they were able to do something. I heard mixed results from the people that were actually doing it on whether or not they felt like it was a good use of their time. But we did have a lot of people that had alts in the system ready to help out. Um, another thing it lets you do is it lets me have tunes that I can effectively just throw away, because if they get potted out, it's not an immense loss. Whereas if I'm losing my mains and my omegas and they're getting potted out for the fight, that's a much larger loss.
I think that using alpha clones like that is something that is really only effective when it's done at scale, and it has to be coordinated at sort of like a macro level, and you have to like reinforce that week
That's
after
true.
week on like a fireside chat in order to get people to do it. You need to have skill plans. You basically have to have that kind of a level of organization and systems to be able to get that to be a useful thing. And that's something that you really only see, I think, in the major nullsec empires, which sort of brings me to my segue, which is, one of the things that when I see a whole bunch of people getting angry, and I heard that there was like, a variety of nullsec entities sort of showing up, and I guess Goonswarm sent a fleet and it got vaporized or whatever, but it was obviously, at least obvious to me, not like, we send fleets everywhere all the time on like a daily basis, and we actually do not keep track of how many, like at the top level of a nullsec empire, I couldn't tell you how many fleets we have out on a given day and where they're going unless they're part of like a strategic campaign. And I understand that the initiative in particular has a lot more interests in this. Like, they, as far as I was concerned, this whole wormhole nonsense only really popped up on my radar when you guys like when the initiative like stuck their dick into rage and like did some sort of thing. They were like, okay, sure, we'll send fleets, whatever, I don't care. It's like a side project for us, but not really. There's no strategic interest, and I don't care. Like, there's no money to be made. There's no empires to be crushed. I don't give a shit. But my question is basically, while we're trying to like air our grievances or figure out what the hell is going on, is like, do you guys often see nullsec entities getting involved in these big fights? And like, is there a perception that like, do you guys think that we care and that we're secretly like pulling strings, or like we're doing something? Like, I guess the question is broadly, what is the view of wormhole people when you see on these big events like a random nullsec fleet? Are you reacting to it like, oh my god, Goonswarm is getting involved? Or is it like, lol, they just got themselves blacked by a PDS and who cares, let's go back to our fight? Like, if you could both speak a little bit about the perceptions of nullsec getting involved in these things.
So nullsec getting involved is generally quite taboo, and the reason for that is, as I said earlier, the scale. Because you guys can form a fun fleet and throw 150, 200. Like Ash's fleet that he took to Solaris for the final timer, for example, was I think 180 strong.
Yeah, that's
and
like
for
nothing.
Hard Knocks to put 180 on field, we did a 4-hour pre-ping for an op in TDS and home a few weeks ago, and we put 100 on field, I think, in Hard Knocks, and that was a monumental amount for us. We were very impressed with that. Hard Knocks as a corp we're not big. We have, let me just count my Discord. I have 75 people in our Discord server. So that's 75 real people. So we're averaging we're really not that big. So
Wow.
It's not so much, oh my god, we hate nullsec so much. It's, oh my god, we hate the scale of nullsec so much.
That's fair.
Okay.
That's completely fair.
So for example,
I love it.
Yeah, we'll take the Beyond the Breach eviction for example, which was essentially a C2 corp that got evicted by Inner Hell, and for their final timer, they bat-phoned anyone they could possibly get a hold of, including a few nullsec groups. And nobody really cared that nullsec went to defend them, because they were just a few smatterings of probably not even 20 or 30 people total from nullsec. And it was just, oh, okay, that's just another group coming to help their friends. But then talking about the bat phones on each side for the TD Sin eviction is just going to turn into a game of, oh, well, they called nullsec first. So I'll summarize it quickly. Essentially, when the initiative turned up on the TD Sin side with 100, I think it was 140, 150, which was more people than we had. Yeah, which was more people than we had online at that time, because it was close to the end of EU time zone, and we were down to about 80 to 90 in fleet. So when the bat phoning force, firstly, the first force to arrive to a wormhole eviction is nullsec, and secondly, it's bigger than our entire attacking force online at the time. The gloves came off then, and that's when the frat bat phone and the NCPL bat phone appeared. They were very last minute things. I can sit here and say, well, we wouldn't have called nullsec if you hadn't have called init, and then Exookzi will say, well, we wouldn't have told init to go to your home if you hadn't have called fratpl. It turns into a bit of a name calling thing.
I didn't tell init to go to your home. Let's just clarify that one line.
Well,
I kind of saw that opportunity.
Certainly didn't tell them not to.
Well, let's just one at a time here. Again, I can tell that people are like mad about spaceships, which is good. But Loroseco, you're giving that explanation, and I kind of like to hear it from Exookzi's side. Is again, like, what is your take on the whole nullsec involvement and all of that? Big sigh.
So, I mean, I think I echo the majority of Loro's statements. I think nullsec involvement for a long time has been taboo. Wormhole Corps, Wormhole space in general, likes to think of itself as separated from the rest of Eve. I mean, there's plenty of wormholers that like to think themselves as significantly better than everyone in nullsec. You see it all over Reddit. I'm not opening that can of worms, but so.
Doesn't threaten me any. Go ahead. You can say it if you want.
We're used to it.
Well, like for example, when Rage was getting hit the first time, at the end of 2017, or 2018, a lot of Wormhole space banded together, if only because Wormhole space versus nullsec was a banner people got behind. There's a lot of corporations that chose to come try to help Hard Knocks, even though I suspect many of them probably wouldn't have if it was just wormholers shooting wormholers. But because the big bad nullsec was coming into our business and shooting all of our stuff, a lot of corporations were there trying to help Rage. I think that taboo is still there. There's a lot of corporations that are not very fond of that, but I also think it's slowly diminishing over time, partially because while the scale that Laura just touched on is absolutely true, Wormhole Corps are bigger than they were several years ago. And so that, while I'm not going to even attempt to argue that the difference that Wormhole Corps are not suddenly much closer to outnumbering most of your null fleets, but that gap is there. There were hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of wormholers on both sides of the Solaris fight. Even before we take any nullsec into account, there were tons and tons of wormholers there at a scale that is very rare and generally unprecedented. So I'm not sure that we're going to see giant fights of that scale constantly. I don't think that we're going to see whole crews of various nullsec entities inserting themselves into every little thing happening in wormhole space. I do think that it will be slowly but probably increasingly more common for a variety of different reasons moving forward, though, that we see stuff happening, because I think some of the scales that wormhole space has slowly been edging towards is getting closer to being interesting. Like if you guys were to hear, hey, 20-man wormhole corps asking for help fighting 40 people in their wormhole, I think most groups, plenty other wormhole groups might roll their eyes. But when I say it's 200 versus 300 versus 400, and there's now like 60 caps on field. We don't have supers or titans, but regardless of allegiances, I think if you got the call that, hey, I've got 80 carriers sitting on a fort here fighting whatever, I think the interest level has been creeping up as well. So I think between Eviction scale rising and Wormhole Corp scales rising, that we've kind of broken through the noise floor in some places, I think. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was more nullsec involvement in wormhole space over 2020.
I think that sort of makes sense. And if there's one thing that I kind of want to make clear, one of the challenges that we have is that in nullsec we take diplomacy very serious, right? Like we have a level of insanity when it comes to Diplo that most entities outside of nullsec do not have. And one of the challenges that we have, of course, in the Imperium is that the initiative really seems to give a shit about wormholes, and I do not give a flying fuck, right? Like we try to do things there, but mainly I think that what you're going to see is nullsec entities will interfere in wormhole space, not because we have like an objective, or like a strategic interest that we're attempting to advance. But like basically like what happened from my perspective while we were dealing with all the chaos the last week was basically like, sure, why not? Initiative decided to get involved in this, and like I guess we can send a fleet and whatever, who cares? I think that you're going to see nullsec involvement sort of be like a sine wave of activity, because this event that took place last weekend happened at a time when there was a massive power vacuum opening up in the galactic northwest, right? Like the timing of what happened, and I think the involvement of so many nullsec entities in this fight that you guys had, which I want to reiterate, and I think should probably be pretty obvious by now, that is just utterly strategically irrelevant to us. Like the kind of numbers you guys are tying. I don't mean that to be like you guys suck. I know that the whole idea is that the wormhole pilots think that they're better than nullsec pilots because it's like, high speed, low drag, bleeding edge, nullsec pilots are F1 monkeys or whatever. But like in terms of strategic interests, it just does not matter to us. And I think what happened here is that because basically Dead Coalition and Sword Dragon. Now I'm going to speak nullsecese here, basically, an autocrat and an entire coalition that held the Galactic Northwest essentially took themselves off the chessboard, opening up this huge power vacuum that there's this big question as to is FRT going to be filling it? Who's going to fill the space that used to be in the Galactic Northwest? And everyone was sort of like looking to see how the cards were falling. And just as everybody's like, okay, well, we're not doing this war thing anymore. Who's going to get the Northwest? Okay, Sword Dragon's off the chessboard. A whole bunch of entities are going to join the Imperium from former Deadco. Okay, what's happening? And then, Initiative decided to pick a fight in Wormhole space, and we had nothing else going on. And so we sent people in there. So I do think you'll see more nullsec interference, intervention, whatever. But I think that's going to be mediated by whether we have stuff that's important to us, right? Because from a top-down perspective, right, if you're telling me that Hard Knocks only has 75 people on Discord, right, what I'm hearing is that what we would call that in nullsec land, or at least Imperium land, a Dunbar's number org, right? It's something that has less than 150 human beings. Everybody's like a little mini tribe. They all know each other, and there isn't really like institutions and bureaucracies or anything that is sent there as like a command and control structure. Like in the Imperium and Goonswarm, we have a coordination team that is essentially like a military style, almost like a cross between military command system and a air traffic control system, and we're monitoring fleets as they go into different areas of the galaxy and shit like that. And you need that kind of scale and bureaucracy in order to organize when you have tens of thousands of people, as opposed to me and 75 of my friends, where we all know each other by name and we're all like, in those under Dunbar's number orgs. So I think it's really an interesting process to see these entities collide, and I guess we'll just sort of see what happens. I sort of went off on a riff there. I think it is interesting to see that this took place because of there's lull in nullsec politics, so you don't have to worry about it. If nullsec is busy killing each other, you guys can have fights, and we probably just won't give a shit. That's the takeaway. And if you see Goonswarm coming into something, and it's when we have a fleet of like 200 guys, that is a peacetime fleet. That is like a small random fleet that's probably not even on the radar of our court. I mean, it's probably on the coordination team's radar, but it's like not a big deal. And my concern in all this is that you guys are thinking, oh my God, nullsec is like sending its tendrils into wormhole space, and they really care because these are rounding error numbers.
No, we don't think that. Absolutely not.
Good.
Yeah, there's a lot of narrative going around. I've heard the word proxy war being thrown around. It's the fight in Solaris. I'm glad you think it's as ridiculous as I do. The fight in Solaris was Hard Knocks versus TD Sen. It's as simple as that.
No, I agree with you. Now, what I would say to Mittens as well as to you is that I think there is the potential here for Cold War style proxy wars if you guys, as Exookzi was saying, are feeling a little less willing to enforce a social taboo against nullsec getting involved. Because I'll tell you from an anecdotal perspective, I talked to one of my friends who's a very solid FC and PanFam, and I asked, why did you guys come? His brother was a former Tidson member, and he liked Tidson, and I was like, why did you guys even show up? And he said, well, we came because you were there. So I feel like there's a possibility of this becoming a situation where one wormhole group fighting another wormhole group. If nullsec has nothing else going on, it suddenly becomes, well, the Soviet Union's going to get involved here, and then so of course the United States has to get involved here, and we got a little Cold War thing going, and you've got all of a sudden you got the Korean War where it's two powers fighting each other, but it's really a proxy war for something bigger. I think that's possible. As I don't think it was the situation that happened recently. I do think there is the potential for that down the road, and that might be interesting to see if that happens. I know you guys don't like that, but hey, if you can take advantage of the fact that everybody that you may ask for help has somebody opposing them that hates their guts enough to show up just to fuck with them, that I think is a potential for maybe getting a little bit more content for you guys. Just keep that in mind.
I have one other thing to say. I just want to make this very clear to anybody in Wormhole space that might be confused about what it looks like when nullsec gives a shit, particularly what it looks like when the Imperium gives a shit. I know that Initiative is very interested in Wormhole space because they are kind of like our high-speed, low-drag.
That's our thing.
Yeah,
we're the biggest goons, SIG, right?
Yeah, you guys are basically like the scalpel, and it's awesome that we have a scalpel for the Imperium, that you guys get to go do these precision strikes and do wacky, for what we call small group kind of specialist combat. But if there is ever a situation where there is a strategic interest for our people, when I say our people, I mean not all of nullsec, but for my people in the Imperium, there will be no fairness. I do not care about what people think about their PvP skill. I do not care about what is fair. All that we care about is victory and the total annihilation of anyone who opposes our strategic interest. Now, we do play nice when we're doing content kind of things, but basically, if you guys think, and it sounds like you don't, but just word to the wise, when we take something seriously, it's like what we did in Tribute. It didn't matter if anybody was fighting back. We were just going to glass region after region until everyone is terrified of us getting serious about going after them. So don't worry if you see a fleet here and there. We're probably just bored, because if we're taking it seriously, there is no hope. We will annihilate you. But we're not going to do that because it doesn't matter. It's fucking Wormhole space. Just have fun, guys. And if we're busy in nullsec, I think that my takeaway from this is basically, if nullsec is healthy, we're busy trying to kill each other at scale. And so it is in the interest of Wormhole space for nullsec gameplay to be good and happy and engaging, because we'll be over here doing our thing and you guys can go over there and do your thing. And if we're busy murdering each other, then you don't really have anything to worry about except for the odd fleet here and there. All right, so we've run over time a little bit, and I appreciate you guys coming on. Again, this is all Greek to me, and so there you go. That's the official position of the state when it comes to intervention in wormhole politics. I really appreciate our guests coming on. Brisk, if you would do us the kindness of wrapping things up. I think we're done for this week. We'll be back next week with some more cool shit. We have both, is it Rise and Signal are going to be on board.
We do.
Which is going to be fantastic, isn't it?
I'm looking forward to next week's show. As Minton said, we were able to secure an interview with CCP Rise, CCP Signal. They're going to talk about, I assume, the frigate, the battleship changes with the frigate addition to those battleships. We're also probably going to talk about whatever else gets announced that's going to be in that release. We're looking forward to having them on the show.
Super dope.
I can't wait. I think it's going to be great.
Because what I think will be really cool to watch is, so obviously with FanFest not happening, there's a lot of stuff that CCP was going to be announcing, and then there's a lot of it stuff that I would say I'm excited to hear and see them sharing with everyone. So if any of that gets announced between now and your next show, you guys could have some really cool stuff to be talking about.
I'm looking forward to it, and I hope you guys all are going to be watching and looking forward to it. And hopefully, Loro and Zuki, we hope to have you guys back. This was a great show. I mean, obviously, it's very rare for Mittens and I to go over time. Both of us are pretty regimented on how long we had to talk. So the fact that we were able to keep you guys on for another 15 minutes, I think that speaks a lot about how interesting this topic was and how little we knew about it. So we appreciate you being here. I'd also like to say to all of my Irish friends, happy St. Patrick's Day on Tuesday. To all of my Irish friends, to all of my fellow Americans who have an Irish ancestry, go out there, enjoy a drink on Tuesday, and remember why Ireland doesn't have snakes. And with that, that has been the Meta Show for March the 14th, 2020. You stay classy, New Eden.